על שימוש בהערכה ב-1987. הוא חידש את הרעיונות שלו שוב ושוב ושוב, והספר יצא כמה פעמים, לאחרונה אני חושבת ב-2008. הוא הוציא עכשיו ספר של Development Evaluation, שזה הערכה עם ה-intended use, אם אתם מכירים את המושגים של patent, זה intended use for intended users. The intended use of development evaluation is development, זאת אומרת פיתוח, אוקיי? אז יש לנו כמה שאלות שנתנו לו, אני כתבתי לכם מיליון פעם, קיבלתי שאלות מאוד טובות מכמה מכם, אבל יהיה זמן לשאלות, אוקיי? Michael, do you hear me?
I do.
Ah, good. Did you understand?
I understood the English part.
Okay, the floor is yours. I just introduced you in Hebrew, and you probably know what I said anyway.
Thank you very much, Barbara, and greetings, everyone. I'm delighted to be with you for this conference and have the opportunity to share some thoughts about using evaluation to its full potential. This has certainly been the major concern of my own 40-year career. And indeed, I think that over 40 years we have learned a great deal about increasing the use of evaluation. The first edition of my utilization-focused evaluation book came out in 1978, and there were subsequent editions in 1986, 1997, and in 2008, all of which were based upon the increasing amount of research and knowledge and practice experience we have about using evaluation. Those of you who have tracked the book over the years know that it has gotten very thick in its fourth edition, in part because I think we know a great deal about using evaluation. Last year I came out with a more practitioner-oriented version of the book called Essentials of Utilization-Focused Evaluation, which also incorporates the new direction of developmental evaluation, building on systems thinking and complexity science, and adding that to the approach of utilization-focused evaluation. So I'm going to share a few thoughts of what I think we've learned, at least some of the highlights. And Barbara sent me some questions in advance, and I'll take those on at the end, and perhaps we'll have time for some more interaction. I want to begin with acknowledging evaluation as a transdiscipline and a profession. The notion of a transdiscipline is a discipline that other disciplines have to use, like philosophy and statistics. Every discipline engages in evaluation, if through nothing else than peer review, but making judgments about what the knowledge base is, what knowledge is verified, what knowledge is not verified in any discipline depends upon evaluation. And as a profession, we've developed standards, we've created journals, we create professional development opportunities, we have engagements like this conference that you're having where people are indeed focusing on quality of evaluation, realizing its full potential, and especially use. The standards, I think, have become quite important because the Joint Committee standards make utility the premier of the standards. The standards were just revised last year. In order to maintain standards in a profession, the International Association of Standards requires that an organization revise and review their standards on some periodic basis. So for the last 3 years, the Joint Committee on Standards has been reviewing the standards, and much of the debate in the review process was about changing the order in which the standards are listed. There were a group of people who wanted to make accuracy first, followed by utility. But in the end, the current order was maintained, the original order was maintained, with utility first, which essentially says that the first thing you have to determine is whether or not you can do something useful and what you can do that will be useful. And you do that in a way that's practical or feasible and ethical, and that the accuracy standards, methodological issues, selecting methods and measures really only comes into play after one understands the use context. In addition, in the latest iteration of the standards, they've added a new category on accountability, which has to do with meta-evaluation, evaluating evaluations for ongoing learning, improvement, and quality assurance. This is where a great deal of our learning comes from, and it has been the basis of my work in revising my books. Is I evaluate every evaluation I'm involved in. That evaluation is part of the accountability of being an evaluation professional, and it is one of the ways that we learn and increase the quality of our work, is to understand what was useful and not useful about evaluation that we've done. So part of using evaluation to its full potential, I would argue, is evaluating evaluation, following up our work systematically to know what was useful and not useful. This means taking use seriously by evaluating use, which is the source of our own accountability for ongoing learning and professional development. We have also learned that use is different from dissemination. I will sometimes ask someone what's happening with their evaluation, how it's being used, and they say, well, we posted the report on the web and we've had 3,000 hits. That's dissemination. It's not use. And as Barbara said in the introduction, the definition of use in utilization-focused evaluation is that you know who the intended users are and that you work with them for the intended uses. We have a great many intended uses, and I'll return to that here in a moment. And there's some questions about working with music that we'll also turn to. But it becomes very important to distinguish use from dissemination. Dissemination is publishing reports, distributing them, putting them on the web, but it's not use. It's also important to distinguish use from producing reports. I think that one of the biggest impediments or barriers to using evaluation to its full potential is that people confuse writing a report with completing an evaluation. In logic modeling terms, a report is an output. The outcome is use. So a report is a means to an end, but it is not the end. Unfortunately, many evaluation contracts end when the report is written. And I believe that one of the things we've learned is that evaluators need to stay engaged after the findings have been generated, need to stay engaged to work with intended users to help them implement recommendations, understand and interpret findings. And so my contracts always include some amount of my time for 3 to sometimes as much as 6 months after the findings are produced and after the report is written to work with people on use. So I would argue that realizing use to its full potential requires work beyond generating reports. We know from research on evaluation use that reports by themselves are not very useful, especially the traditional thick monograph kind of report. So reporting of findings now takes many forms, including creative forms on using video, using visual means, interactions, policy briefs, executive summaries, and we're having to learn how to get better at engaging intended users with appropriate and high-powered forms of communications. Another thing that we've learned is that the groundwork for use is laid and the expectations are set at the beginning. So use is not something that one attends to after the findings are generated. Use is something that we have to attend to and worry about and engage with from the very beginning of the evaluation. It's the equivalent of the farmer tilling the soil before planting the seeds. We have to till the soil of potential use with intended users, create a mindset and an expectation of use, get roles clear, clarify purpose, be sure that the important questions and relevant questions are being asked. All of that is front-end work, not back-end work. And so setting the stage for use is something that happens at the beginning. And finally, use, we've learned, is not natural. It doesn't happen automatically. And so building capacity for use, working with intended users around use, the capacity building function of evaluation has become an important part of what we do to enhance use. As Barbara mentioned in her introduction, the focus of utilization-focused evaluation is on what we've called the personal factor. The fact that organizations don't use information, people do. And so we have to be clear about who the intended users are and set priorities among different intended users, involve them in being sure that the evaluation is appropriately focused and that we're doing the kind of evaluation that will lead to use. Jean King was with you 2 years ago, and her work on essential competencies has become very important, and I thought it would be worth reviewing that given this theme of using evaluation to its full potential, because using evaluation to its full potential requires that evaluators have the essential skills for realizing evaluation's full potential. Jean's essential skills framework is now being used in Canada, New Zealand, and Japan as a basis for voluntary certification of evaluators. And the essential skills that her work focuses on is professional knowledge, knowing and observing professional norms and values, including the evaluation standards and principles. Every client that I work with, I give them a copy of the standards, explain that I'm part of a profession, and that these standards are what I'm accountable and responsible for, so that they understand that utility is part of my professional responsibility. Systematic inquiry is our methodological competence, our expertise in technical aspects of evaluation, design, measurement, analysis, interpretation, and sharing results. And for many evaluators, they think that's all that evaluation is about, is the systematic inquiry, the accuracy standards, the methodological parts. What the essential competencies framework makes clear is that methodological competence is only one of 6 essential skills. So the first is knowing the professional standards and norms of practice. Second is engaged in systematic, methodologically high-quality inquiry. The third, which is very important, is situation analysis, understanding and attending to textual and political issues of the evaluation, engaging in evaluability assessments, addressing conflicts, attending to issues of evaluation use from the beginning. I had the opportunity to work with a group of people involved in developing artificial intelligence, the kind of people who developed the Big Blue IBM Chess Masters program and who are working on software to take us inside how great lawyers think, how great medical diagnosticians diagnose diseases, how great architects design buildings, a variety of kinds of expertise. And what they have found is that expertise does not consist of having ready-made answers to problems. Experts are characterized by astute situation recognition. Experts are able to recognize the situation that they're in and to do the things that are appropriate to match that situation. The answers emerge from the situation. That's what situational analysis is about. Project management is an important set of skills, being able to actually conduct an evaluation within budget and on time. One of the greatest complaints about many evaluators, and I hear this most about academically based evaluators, is that they don't meet timelines. They don't get the findings done in time to be useful. That's a project management skill. Delivering the product on time of high quality in this scope of work that was laid out in the design is about managing the work well. And then reflective practice and awareness of one's program evaluation expertise as well as the needs for professional growth. It's what this kind of conference offers an opportunity for. But it's essential that evaluators be able to improve their practice, reflect on their practice, and a part of that, as I mentioned earlier, is evaluating our own evaluation work. And finally is a set of interpersonal competencies. The people skills of being able to work with diverse groups of stakeholders to conduct program evaluations, including writing skills, oral communication skills, negotiation, and cross-cultural skills. The American Evaluation Association just this past year approved a set of standards on cultural competence, which make it clear that a part of interpersonal competence is being able to assess and engage with the organizational, cultural, community kinds of culture, organizational culture that will affect how evaluation is approached, how it's understood, what kind of engagement happens. When I teach evaluation, which I regularly do, I train evaluation as part of my work, I treat evaluation as a cross-cultural experience that most of the intended users, the stakeholders, the policymakers, the program staff, the community-based people with whom I work are not familiar very much with evaluation. They don't use our jargon. And so for them, evaluation is a cross-cultural experience as they learn about how evaluators think and as we learn about what their issues are and how they think about the world and what their worldview is. This is part of the interpersonal competence aspects of our essential competencies. And using evaluation to its full potential ultimately depends upon the essential skills of the evaluator. And that means that we have to be good at what we do, know our role, play it well, if we're going to realize the full potential of use by being highly skilled at what we do. It's part of recognizing that this is a profession and that it's not enough to be trained as a researcher to be able to perform as an evaluator. We take on a number of different identities in evaluation, not just as evaluator, but as methodologists, and using research methods. Sometimes evaluators are auditors, inspectors, sometimes we're learning facilitators, sometimes we play a role of judge. And all of these roles play different ways in different kinds of evaluation. But in honor of April Fool's Day today, I wanted to emphasize an additional role that I think can be quite important, and that is the role of the jester. You'll recall that in medieval times, the role of the jester was to speak truth to power. The role of the medieval jester was to help the monarch, the king or queen, know what was really going on in the kingdom. Monarchs in medieval times, and many times leaders in organizations and in countries, surround themselves with people who tell them what they want to hear. It was the job of the jester to break through that confirmation bias and find ways to have the monarch hear what was really going on, to speak truth to power in a way that could be heard. Those are the communication skills, and it often involves humor, So the jester would play the role of the fool, which we celebrate on April Fool's Day, but doing so for the greater purpose of embedding important knowledge and understanding, reality testing in humor as a form of communication. And so in my books, I have adopted the figure of the jester to represent one of the roles that we play as helping speak truth to power. This role is embodied in the evaluation version of the Genesis story, which is in the opening of utilization-focused evaluation. And in case there are some of you who have not heard the evaluation version of the Genesis story, I thought that I would share it with you as a part of the challenge of using evaluation to its full potential. And it goes like this. In the beginning, God created heaven and earth. And God saw everything that was made. Behold, God said, it is very good. And the evening and the morning were the sixth day. And on the seventh day, God rested from all work. God's archangel, playing the role of the jester, came then asking, God, how do you know that what you created is very good? What are your criteria? On what data do you base your judgment? Just what results were you hoping to achieve? And aren't you a little close to the situation to make a fair and unbiased judgment? God thought about these questions all that day, and God's rest was greatly disturbed. On the eighth day, God said, Lucifer, go to hell. Thus was evaluation born in a blaze of glory, so to speak. I tell this story when I conduct workshops with clients. I begin every evaluation with a workshop with primary intended users, with staff, with participants in a program representing participants, with funders, with administrators, to set the stage for evaluation and to, in telling this evaluation version of the Genesis story, to both remind them of the core questions of evaluation. How does one know that they're doing good? Which requires identifying criteria, which requires collecting data about those criteria, which requires dealing with our relationship to those data, to reality testing, and requires understanding that these are hard questions, tough questions. They're not often treated as welcoming questions. Evaluation is one of those words like subpoena and biopsy that a lot of people would just as soon not have in their lives. And so this story captures the common resistance to truth-telling that we encounter. And part of our skills to realize the full potential of evaluation, we have to become adept at speaking truth to power in ways that could be heard. In 2005, at the last International Evaluation Conference in Toronto, the theme of which was Crossing Borders and Crossing Boundaries, I was the program co-chair of that conference with Brad Cousins, and we created the first International Speaking Truth to Power Award and gave it to General Romeo Dallaire, the Canadian general in charge of the peacekeeping forces in Rwanda, who leading up to the genocide in Rwanda, in the killing between the Hutu and the Tutsi, in which 800,000 people were murdered in that genocide, General Dallaire was essentially playing the role of the evaluator. He was sending daily reports to the leaders, the diplomatic community in the United Nations, in Europe, in the United States. He was asking for 5,000 more troops to keep the warring parties apart, and the world ignored the evaluation findings, ignored his data, ignored his reports, and the result was genocide. I opened the 4th edition of Utilization-Focused Evaluation with this story to remind people that the stakes of ignoring data can be quite high. Both of the space shuttle disasters were examples of ignoring the data. The problems were known, but the data were ignored. In the case of Rwanda, President Clinton, in his memoir, said that the thing that he most regretted was not paying attention to what was developing in Rwanda. And he returned to Rwanda to apologize to the Rwandan people for ignoring the data. A number of European leaders returned to Rwanda and apologized for allowing the genocide to go forward. It amounted to ignoring the data. And you well know the high stakes that are involved in such instances. And so it becomes important, if we're going to realize the full potential evaluation, to become skilled at speaking truth to power, engaging with policymakers in ways that they can hear what we have to say. And that has always been the critical role of the jester. Now, the value-added challenge of evaluation is matching the evaluation and process and design to the nature of the situation to achieve intended use by intended users. So that's where situational analysis, including power dynamics in the political context, come into play in a kind of contingency-based approach to evaluation, adapting what we do to context, which includes making utilization-focused methods decisions. Although I have written a book on qualitative methods, I use all kinds of methods. And the challenge here in being methodologically eclectic, using mixed methods, using a variety of methods, runs up against the very narrow methodological bias that sometimes occur that treats a certain experimental design approach as a gold standard. For some years, we had an active debate between qualitative and quantitative methodologists, and we eventually found rapprochement. We agreed that both qualitative and quantitative methods are important, and that mixed methods are particularly useful when they can be used because the different methods give us different insights into the nature of whatever it is we're evaluating. But now, instead of the qualitative-quantitative debate, we have the gold standard debate with some researchers and evaluators continuing to argue that randomized controlled trials are the gold standard. I argue that is inappropriate and actually does harm, because when we name any particular approach as a gold standard, it immediately makes all other methodological approaches secondary. It makes them less valuable than the gold standard. It's not just that we can't always do a randomized controlled trial. It's that very often randomized controlled trials, if they could even be done, would not be appropriate. They are rigid, they are narrow, they answer certain kinds of questions well, but not other kinds of questions well. And so I argue with colleagues that the true gold standard for evaluation is methodological appropriateness, that the methods we use are appropriate to the questions that are being asked by primary intended users to realize the full potential of evaluation through actual use. Methods have to match the questions, and that matching of the questions emerges out of an understanding of the utilization situation, intended use by intended users. We have to have available to us then, as the essential skills acknowledge, a range of methods that would be appropriate to match the particular situation. Evaluation's overall value then is dependent upon the value that we add in a particular evaluation and a specific approach. The way in which the larger society will value, fund, come to value evaluation, it depends upon what we do in any particular evaluation and our capacity as a profession to pull together the kinds of contributions we make and communicate them. So that a major role that the American Evaluation Association now has with its staff is communicating actively to policymakers that the profession exists, that the profession has standards, that there are essential skills that evaluators bring, and to educate them about the value of meaningful evaluation. Now, part of that is knowing how to do different kinds of evaluation. This is an excerpt from the children's author Dr. Seuss from his storybook called Mrs. McCabe and Her 23 Days, which begins, "Did I ever tell you about Mrs. McCabe who had 23 sons and she named them all Dave?" Well, she did, and that wasn't a smart thing to do. You see, when she wants one and calls out, "You come into the house, Dave," all 23 sons of hers come on the run. And the story proceeds with some very creative, possible Seussian names that she might have named her various sons. Well, this is a reference to the many different kinds of evaluation that we have generated. In the 4th edition of Utilization-Focused Evaluation, I identify over 100 different kinds of evaluation that the field now recognizes. We've built on the original distinctions of formative to summative evaluation, and now there are theory-driven evaluations, participatory, empowerment, inclusive, transformative, gold standard, experimental kinds of evaluations by name. And so we've got this whole range of kinds of evaluation, understanding what those names mean, understanding their appropriateness, understanding the situations for which they are best implemented is one of the great challenges of using evaluation to its full potential. Each of those different kinds of evaluation approaches was generated to meet particular kind of situations. The work that I've been doing in developmental evaluation recently is especially aimed at innovations in complex dynamic systems. So one of the challenges of using evaluation to its full potential is understanding the kinds of evaluation that we're generating, and we keep generating new approaches, and what kind of situations those are for. So it's not just the experience that makes us effective evaluators, but focused practice and reflection on experience to achieve situational responsiveness, to make our evaluations, our evaluation approaches and models fit the situation, to have a repertoire of possibilities that we can bring to bear. I want to turn to another way in which using evaluation to its full potential has become important. Bob Stake, one of the pioneers of evaluation, wrote what I think is a very provocative article in the American Journal of Evaluation called "Beyond Neutrality, What Evaluators Care About." And it's in acknowledging what we care about and how we engage in our work that we increase the possibility of realizing evaluation to its full potential. And so this again comes back to the essential skills, the way in which we as evaluators, our commitments, our professional engagement makes a difference. And in arguing that evaluators cannot simply play a neutral role about the issues we take on, Bob said that evaluators care about 6 things. We often care about the thing being evaluated. Now, this is controversial, but I find it very helpful in the clients that I work with, the programs that I work with, that they understand the values that I bring to evaluation. So who wants an evaluator who's neutral about hunger, who's neutral about HIV/AIDS, who's neutral about violence, abuse? We care about these things. Part of what attracts us to evaluation is it is often our mechanism for making a contribution to a better world. So it is appropriate, and it increases, I would argue, realizing evaluation to its full potential when the people we work with understand the value base that we come from. We as evaluation professionals care about evaluation. We care about quality evaluation. That's why we do the work. We advocate rationality. We care to be heard. We are troubled if our studies are not used, which is the centerpiece of this conference. We are stressed by underprivilege. We see gaps among privileged patrons and managers and the staff and underprivileged participants in communities. And so that's part of the political and organizational context we deal with. And Bob argues we are advocates of a democratic society where information can be transparently generated and shared and become part of the democratic dialogue. So let me close, before I take on some of the questions that were generated, by talking about one of the most important directions in using evaluation to its full potential that has emerged in the last decade, and that is the attention to process use, not just findings use, but process use. Process use refers to the kind of impacts that we have as we conduct an evaluation, the kind of impacts that occur along the way, from the very beginning. When we work with people to decide what's going to get measured. The mantra, what gets measured gets done, is an example of process use. Selecting measures creates focus on what people in programs actually pay attention to. Anybody who's ever done a logic model or worked with program staff to clarify their theory of change is already having an impact before any data are gathered. When we take people through the process of thinking evaluatively, of clarifying their goals, of deciding what the criteria are for success, all of those ways of thinking, we have learned, have an impact quite apart from and beyond findings use. And often that impact is greater and longer lasting than the findings themselves. Findings get out of date quickly. But when we build the capacity of the people we work with in programs to think evaluatively, to interpret data, to engage in ongoing evaluation, we have a more lasting impact. So process use for the last decade in both theory, research, and practice has been one of the major new directions in evaluation. And again, in honor of April Fool's Day, let me remind you of the Sufi story of the wise fool Nasruddin, who was known in his village to be a smuggler. And he was smuggling things across the border, and the border guards knew he was smuggling, and every time that he crossed the border, they searched him and searched his donkeys, but they could never find what he was smuggling. And meanwhile, Nasruddin was growing wealthier and wealthier. And so one of the border guards retired, and Nasruddin happened to go to a bar, a drinking establishment, where this retired border guard offered to buy Nasruddin a drink if he would tell him confidentially what he had been smuggling. He said, you know, it's been driving me crazy. I still lose sleep over the fact that we knew you were smuggling, but we could never catch you. We searched you, we searched your donkeys, we could never find what you were smuggling. So tell me, I promise not to tell anyone, but it will help me sleep better at night if you'll just tell me what you were smuggling. And Nasruddin replied, I was smuggling donkeys. Well, in this cartoon, we see our April Fool's jester, the evaluator, at the border, and the border guard is saying, do you have anything to declare? And the evaluation jester replies, yes. Evaluation is a way of thinking. And his donkey says, they're only looking for findings. One of the big developments then in realizing evaluation to its full potential is paying attention not just to findings use, but ways to increase process use. I find increasingly as I do this that I have to work not just with the people and organizations charged with technical information gathering and reporting and writing reports, but I do a lot of training with leaders as primary intended users. I do workshops on evaluation as a leadership function. in which what we look at is building the capacity for reality testing, results-oriented, learning-focused leadership. Because part of what we've learned is to realize evaluation to its full potential, the leaders of organizations, the policymakers have to directly get engaged in using findings, that we have to reach them. Not enough to set up management information systems in an organization. It's not enough to set up studies. We have to get to the leaders to help them value evaluation. Again, in the medieval jester metaphor, speaking truth to power and building the capacity of leaders to be willing to engage in reality testing, to look at what results they're achieving, to learn how to become more effective. That capacity building becomes a major way of using evaluation to its full potential. A study was done among social innovators who I work with and leaders a great deal, in which they were shown a large number, actually about 20 different photographs, and asked them which one most evoked evaluation to them. And this was the winning picture. This was the image people had of evaluation, which does not help us reach its full potential. The image people have of evaluation is this baggage, this heavy burden that slows them down. And this is especially true of social innovators who, as I've come to know them, hate evaluation. They find it gets in the way, it slows them down, it's this big burden. It keeps them from being able to move forward. And so my recent work in developmental evaluation is about increasing real-time feedback, dealing with rapid change in complex dynamic systems, and helping social innovators move forward to realize evaluation's full potential rather than being perceived as holding them back. In all of this, then, we are facing the challenge of using evaluation to its full potential. So those are my overall thoughts I wanted to share with you. Barbara sent me some questions. Barbara sent me some questions in advance, and Barbara, shall I just go ahead and begin with those questions?
Yeah, I think so. It's a good idea.
Okay.
First of all, just thank you. That was wonderful.
Thank you.
We're in a place in the world where it's hard to speak the truth to power.
I understand that. That makes it all the more important. The stakes are huge. Stakes are huge. And it's been going downhill on this side as well, let me assure you. It's not no picnic speaking truth to power here. We got a lot of folks that don't want to hear stuff. So Nir asked, please ask Professor Patton to refer in some detail to the part of intimate personal relation qualifications of the effective utilization-focused evaluation facilitator. And I mentioned Gene King's work on essential skills. This is a relationship-focused approach, so that we do have to be able to get good at what is sometimes called boundary management in relationships. That is, we have to be able to build trust with intended users, but not get so close to them that our credibility is suspect, that we're not able to speak truth to them, that they understand and value our role of helping them look at what's really going on. So let me give a quick example, since the request here is for some detail of how I use, in Bob Stake's terms, my own value framework to help establish this relationship. I was asked by the Professional Hospice Association, hospices being places where people who are terminally ill go to spend their final days with pain relief and a place to get care where their families can join them. I was asked by the Hospice Association to evaluate how they could improve the experiences of families who were experiencing the death of a loved one. And I agreed to take on that study, and when I met with the intended users, who were the directors of hospices and their funders, and some family representatives, there's a family association of hospices, I explained to them and spent some time getting to know them that I was taking on this evaluation because I cared about the effectiveness of hospices, because my younger brother died in a hospice early in the AIDS epidemic, before there were antiretroviral drugs. And that because I knew of the horror of AIDS, because I had lost my younger brother to AIDS, when I examined ways in which the hospice might be more effective, I would not be giving them a pass. I would not treat this lightly. I would not go easy on them, because I knew how high the stakes were. I knew how important hospice was to my own family. And so when I work with HIV/AIDS programs, I tell them that I care deeply about AIDS, I care about their effectiveness, and so I want them to know that I share their values and respect their work that they are doing to try to prevent AIDS, to educate people about AIDS, to help people living with AIDS. But because I also care about those things, I will connect with them, I will relate to them, I will help them learn, but I will not be giving them a free pass. In fact, I find that I can be more assertive. I'm more able to speak truth to power. I'm more able to say this is what's working and not working with assertiveness, and I can be heard because they know I'm not out to get them. They know that I'm coming at this from a place of values. Mira asks, has your attitude toward evaluation changed over the years, and what changes have you made and why? A couple of things come up here. One of the things that we predicted in the very first edition of utilization-focused evaluation back in the 70s, when there wasn't much attention to evaluation use, was that as use increased, misuse would also increase. And so what we're seeing, especially here in the United States, is not only increased use, but increased misuse, distorting evaluation findings, cherry picking, only presenting part of the findings, not looking at the entire balanced picture. And of course, the best example of that is the way in which the intelligence community was completely politicized prior to the invasion of Iraq, and that data were manipulated and corrupted to justify the invasion of Iraq. Well, this happens on a smaller scale in all kinds of politically driven situations where evaluation has become part of the tool of political discourse, and policymakers and politicians and people advocating for particular points of view are misusing evaluation. Misuse is greatly on the increase, and so we're having to develop approaches to be more vigilant about the distorted uses of evaluation. The other thing is the work in developmental evaluation, the need to increase the speed of feedback. Evaluation is slow. We don't get stuff out quickly. Innovators are making real-time decisions, and so part of what I've been working with here in Changes is that everything in our world has speeded up. The mantra of the time is real-time, 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 and so evaluation has had to become more real-time. We've got to be quicker. We've got to be more nimble. We've got to be more agile. Second question from Amira, what are the limits of staff participation? And where does the role of the evaluators and individual begin? Well, in some ways, I was responding to that in Neer's question. And I think the issue here is the increasing importance of capacity building. That staff participation requires building capacity to participate. So that the role of the evaluator is in part facilitating learning how to engage as staff in evaluation. People don't know how to do this naturally. So a major theme of evaluation, we've had several of our American Evaluation Association conferences on capacity building, on learning, on ways of engaging staff in ways that they come at this with some skill and with some understanding, and that we are able to work with them so that an evaluation is not just aimed at generating findings, but it's also aimed, as I said, through process use at building the capacity of people to engage in evaluation. At what point does the evaluator's job end? I think this is a matter for mutual negotiation. I've already said that my contracts build in time beyond the report to work with people to facilitate the implementation of findings and recommendations. So there's always money in the contract to follow it up. And as I said just a moment ago, our job is to be vigilant about not only appropriate use, but to watch out for and guard against misuse. That's partly our responsibility. Is the evaluator's role to judge, and to what degree? This is also a part of negotiation. Working to facilitate the judgment of the intended users is my preferred way to work. They're the ones that are ultimately responsible for implementing the findings of evaluation. But I am often asked to include my own judgments about what the data mean, my own judgments about the extent to which an intervention, project, or program has merit or worth, and especially in conducting meta-evaluations. I just conducted a meta-evaluation, an evaluation of the Paris Declaration on International Aid. If you Google Paris Declaration evaluation, you'll find that. It's all on the web. And I rendered a judgment about the effectiveness and rigor of that evaluation because that was my commission. So when we are commissioned to play the role of judge, and that's what we've been negotiated to do, and that's what intended users want for utility, then we play that role. The issues that trouble me, as I said, are misuse and mechanical use. People who are setting arbitrary performance targets and treating meeting or not meeting those targets in very high-stakes ways as the basis for decision-making rather than actually interpreting what the targets mean. Donald Campbell, one of our pioneers, forecast when his great work, the Experimenting Society, that the major barrier to creating a democratic society where people could engage with data about what works and doesn't work would be the corruption of high-stakes indicators. And we see that all around us. Most of the major scandals that we find in the financial world, for example, are corruption of high-stakes indicators. When corporate leaders and directors get huge bonuses for meeting certain targets, they do what they do. They do what they need to do and have to do to meet those targets, which includes falsifying data, fudging the data, manipulating the data. It happens among politicians. It happens in the corporate sector and the private sector. And so the whole problem of high-stakes evaluation, the corruption of indicators, is a concern to me. And finally is evaluation research. I have a major section in utilization-focused evaluation, distinguishing evaluation from research, basically arguing that the standards, which I covered earlier, are what makes evaluation distinct from research. Evaluators use research methods, but research does not actually carry the burden of being useful. Research is typically judged on methodological quality by peer reviewers and contribution to theory and knowledge, but not on utility. And as I said, the Joint Committee standards make it clear that the first criterion for evaluation is that it gets used. No matter how methodologically sophisticated and elegant an evaluation is, if it's not used, it's not a good evaluation. Research does not bear that burden. Barbara asks, how can you involve, here we go. Still have some questions from Amir here, sorry. In what circumstances should an evaluator not take on an evaluation? When you can't do anything useful. I ran an evaluation center for some years, and I did evaluations that weren't useful from time to time because I had to keep staff employed, but I always knew that that's what I was doing. I didn't think I was doing a utilization-focused evaluation then. So the very first assessment is, can I do something useful here? So Barbara asked, how can you involve both the formative and summative stakeholders, those who operate the program and benefit and use the evaluation, and those who make policy decisions about whether or not to continue the program? I treat those as very different intended users, so that I think that that there actually is a firewall between formative and summative evaluation. They involve different relationships with intended users. They typically involve different questions. They typically involve different methods, and they take place at a different period of time. Indeed, the purpose of formative evaluation in Scriven's original distinction was to get ready for summative evaluation. So I think that we involve them differently by really honoring those differences. You might be interested to know that when I teach the difference between formative and summative evaluation, I use the first chapter of the book of Daniel, which has in it both a formative and a summative evaluation. Have a look at it. I use that to distinguish the evaluation done for the participants and with the participants in the program to improve the program, and the evaluation done for the king to make a decision about whether or not the program is effective. It's a very nice example of this distinction and the importance of keeping in mind that formative and summative evaluations are very different forms, involve different people, and engage them in different ways. And finally, how can you lower the high cost, the high price of evaluation in a utilization-focused evaluation? The primary new direction here is building evaluation into the program process so that it's not just an add-on external thing done by an expensive external evaluator. That's why the emphasis on process use has become so important. That's why the emphasis on building capacity has become so important. So that when the evaluation process is making the program more effective, quite apart from the findings, when you're building the capacity of staff to be more effective, the funds to support evaluation come not just from the evaluation budget. The evaluations that I do, people find enough value in the capacity building, the professional development of staff, the organizational development, the leadership development, that program funds are used for those purposes. And so part of the cost of evaluation are offset by the contributions to ongoing program and organizational and leadership development by building evaluative thinking into the process, so that the barrier between evaluation and organizational development, and I know that's been some of the theme of your conference today, is broken down. But the highest of all the standards in the Joint Committee standards is one of the standards in the feasibility group that calls for evaluations to be cost-free. That is the recognition that every dollar spent on evaluation are funds not spent on feeding the hungry, sheltering the homeless, curing the sick. And so that standard calls for evaluation to be specifically and fully useful enough to merit the cost of the evaluation. It's a really important question, and indeed in some ways using evaluation to its full potential means generating enough value that it's actually worth the money that the evaluation costs. That's the highest of all of our standards. Thank you for those great questions.
Thank you for the great answers. I have other questions, but I think we have time maybe for one person to ask a question in real time. Anybody want to ask a question? Yes, Roman, you want to come up here and? Okay.
Hi, Professor.
Hello.
We told today a lot about differences between business development consultant and the evaluator. Can you say some differences? Organizational consultant, business development consultant, it's same.
What Roman is asking to say a little about the differences between an organizational consultant and an evaluator.
Great question, and the differences I think are becoming less. Clearly, the field of organizational development and evaluation grew up separately. They are parallel fields, And we're beginning to communicate more. But first and foremost, the unit of analysis is different. Evaluation, we say, grew up in the projects and has tended to focus on projects and programs as the unit of analysis. Organizational development takes the organization as the unit of analysis. Part of what's driving more interaction between evaluation and organizational development is the finding over the 40 years of evaluation that ineffective projects are often due to ineffective programs in which the project exists, and that ineffective programs often are due in part to ineffective organizations within which the program exists, and in fact ineffective organizations often are part of a dysfunctional system. And so part of what the work in developmental evaluation includes is looking at the organizational system within which projects and programs operate, looking at the larger system dynamics so that the differences between organizational development and evaluation are overlapping to an increasing extent. Historically, I think the big difference has been that organizational development was more directed toward process kinds of things, having people communicate better, solving organizational problems. Organizational development did not make overall judgments of merit and worth, and did not use research methods to the same extent that evaluation has. Evaluation always carries the mandate to support decision-making and learning through judging merit and worth and significance. But as the unit of analysis has changed to entire organizations and systems, and that's part of what developmental evaluation is, I actually think that there's more overlap now than there ever has been.
Thank you very much. What? Any more? I want to thank you very, very much on behalf of all of us. It was just a wonderful hour. And we have here an open invitation for you to come whenever you want. To
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation, Barbara, and thank you for organizing this.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Okay.
I'll say goodbye then.
Bye.
Bye-bye, Michael.
Goodbye.